Hello, good morning everyone. This is Abdul Chare from Galaxy Commercial Limited. In our today's video, I'd like to talk about cashew processing in Africa and specifically in Ivory Coast as a case study. Today, we want to look at why Africa is behind with respect to cashew processing. Let's say a few words about Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire to our new viewers or those that are new to the cashew industry. Please note that Ivory Coast is located in West Africa. It has a very dynamic cashew sector. It's also the world's largest ASEAN producer with over 700,000 metric tons recorded in 2015. Ivory Coast also has a very strong growth per annum, which is about 10%. It's also the largest exporter of raw cashew nuts. In 2015, 650,000 metric tons were exported raw, and that's what we're going to try to understand why the cashew produced by the country is not processed locally, but a good chunk is exported raw. We're going to try to understand as to why that is the case. Here is a picture of Ivory Coast, the map of Ivory Coast, with a different major production area. As you can see, the cashew is mostly produced in the northern part of Ivory Coast, as well as the center and the eastern parts of the country. In the north, in places like Korogo, Ojene, Bunjali, there's a good chunk of cashew that are produced in those areas. And then in the center part of Ivory Coast, in places like Boake, Yamoussoukro, a lot of the cashew production will actually come via Boake, which is kind of a crossroads before reaching the port in Abidjan or San Pedro. There's also an eastern part of Ivory Coast where you will find the best quality of cashew produced in Ivory Coast in places like Bondoukou, like Tanda, and these, what's as particular about this production area is that it's border with Ghana. Okay, that's why there's sometimes some issues with cross-border sale of cashew, smuggling of cashew across the border. But it's the quality in the eastern parts of Ivory Coast is very good. Yeah, now that we've said a few words about Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire, now let's move on to the challenges faced by the industry with respect to cashew processing. I'm going to list some of those issues. First of all, there's machinery issues. The machine required to process are not manufactured locally. They have to be imported. There are infrastructure problem, lack of proper warehousing, which is quite common. There are technical issues, lack of local expertise. There are training issues. There's also lack of knowledge with respect to byproducts, like shell, like the apple, not knowing what to do with the different grades. There are technology issues, as well as lack of financial services. So in essence, these are some of the key issues, even though there are others, but these are some of the issues faced by those who want to go into processing. When there are so many issues with respect to processing, there will be opportunities and strong opportunities. Okay, let's say a few words about those opportunities. First of all, you have to know that 85% of IVC, Ivory Coast ASEAN, is processed in India, in Vietnam, 85%. Okay, which means there is a huge demand for local processing. Okay, that's why the rates of processing unit being set up is quite high. Okay, and there's still room to increase the volume. So there is an opportunity for those who want to process in the Ivory Coast. There's also a strong government commitment to develop the cashew sector in a large scale with the help of a body called CCA, le Conseil Coton Anacarde, which is the Cotton and Cashew Board. And in our next slide, I'm going to say a few words about those incentives for the cashew processing industry. Now let's look at those incentives provided by the government of Ivory Coast. What are they? I'm going to mention some of the key ones, not all of them, but some of the key incentives provided by the government. The first one is a 70-cent subsidy per kilo of locally processed cashew kernel. Secondly, there is a credit guarantee scheme to facilitate domestic financial lending to processors. This is to address one of the issues I mentioned earlier, which was the lack of financial support. By having a credit guarantee scheme in place, it helped a local processor obtain loan from the bank and other financial institutions. The next one is the duty-free importation of cashew processing equipment for 5 years. As you know, the machinery and the equipment, the processing equipment, are not manufactured locally in the Ivory Coast. They have to be imported from India, from Vietnam. So the processor will benefit from a duty-free importation. And the next one is the export tax exemption for processors of cashew kernel, which means every time that you export your cashew kernel processed locally in the Ivory Coast, there is an export tax exemption. So there's no tax or very little tax to pay for your export of cashew kernel from Ivory Coast. So these are some of the few incentives provided by the government of Ivory Coast.
Nearly a quarter of the world's cashew nuts come from Ivory Coast. But the government has a plan to create more jobs and produce an even better crop. In April, the World Bank approved a $200 million loan to build more cashew processing plants like this. The goal is to employ people like Isabel Ahau.
I invest elsewhere. I do business so I can look for business and can provide for my family and help my husband.
Ahau works in one of the few cashew processing plants in Ivory Coast. But by building more, the government aims to process all of the country's nuts by 2020. The scheme should also improve the nuts' quality and fetch a better price on international markets.
We have shown that we know how to produce nuts. Now we have to demonstrate that we can sell them and above all process them, because it's in food processing that the real added value lies. It's the processing which can generate employment, which allows families and especially women to have jobs and provide for their families.
Today, I'd like to say a few words about the strength and opportunity of processing in Africa. Okay, one of the benefits is the product availability. As we all agree, Africa is a major producer of ASEAN in the world, so the availability of raw material to process should not be an issue, which is very important. Without raw material, there's no processing. Okay. The other benefit is there seems to be a rising demand for African processed cashew in certain Western market, especially for those customers who want to go organic, which is interesting. The other benefit is the proximity of Africa to Western market. For example, West Africa is only 2 weeks away to Europe, depending on your freight company. It could be even shorter, which is also a benefit. There's also a dynamic workforce available in Africa, which is very important. The other benefit is there seems to be more and more African government support for local processing, which is to be encouraged. Recently also, the African processor are working hard to meet all the certification requirements by Western market, which is also interesting. And finally, processing in Africa can help address some of the environmental issues, So yeah, let me stop here today because we don't want the video to be too long. If you have any comments, anything you would like to add, please feel free to send me your comments.